I said in my last video that Amazon's The Rings of Power isn't doing nearly as well as they expected, and a recent Forbes article confirmed this. In his article, Paul Tassi says, quote, "While I expected the various controversies the show generated to result in a barrage of negative reviews right at launch, the weeks that followed haven't brought any sort of relief for The Rings of Power. By all available metrics, there is no place where fans have rallied to give the show consistently high remarks, with scores not having improved noticeably the more episodes that have been rolled out, which you will sometimes see after the initial period of bombing/skepticism. Now, this claim of review bombing is a not-so-clever way of deflecting criticism of the show. I'm sure some people leave negative reviews without ever watching the show. However, you need proof that most of the reviews are fake, and no one's given any. How do you know they didn't watch the show? Maybe the ratings, which you can see here on screen, are legit. They're all middling or low ratings from the audience, and the same for about a third of the media critics. It also doesn't help that sites like Rotten Tomatoes and Amazon block reviews to try to prevent negative critiques to make it look like people actually like the show. They're not helping their own credibility by doing that, and I suspect that if they could prevent off-site critiques, like mine, they probably would. The bigger issue is that after 4 weeks, it's clear that the audience doesn't think this is a good show. The question is why, and Tassi suggests that it's the deviation from the lore and the pacing. Quote, "Everyone does not like me comparing Rings of Power to HBO's also high-budget fantasy series, House of the Dragons. But needless to say, despite enduring similar initial race and gender-based casting controversies, its audience scores are much higher. The low scores are generally the product of either fans saying the show strays too much from Tolkien's original world, or just not thinking the series is very well written or paced, with its long, slow-building arcs. Now, the lore issue is definitely a problem for some fans. The deviations are massive in this show, to the point of altering the history of Middle-earth, meaning certain events haven't or can't happen. However, most people aren't delving into the lore. The problem is the writing of the show, not just the pacing, but the dialogue, the characters, the plot, the story, and the themes. They're either a rehash of Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, or some typical fantasy yarn riddled with tired tropes and grotesque stereotypes. Maybe if the showrunners were more interested in telling the good story instead of playing politics and injecting their bland ideas into Tolkien's world, they wouldn't have done something as silly as giving the hobbits stage Irish accents. The Irish Times called them out on this insulting depiction, calling the show's hobbits, quote, "Paleolithic leprechauns." And despite the showrunners bending over backwards to be politically correct, apparently that doesn't apply to anyone from the British Isles. All the accents in the show are stereotypes. Why do the dwarves sound Scottish? Well, because John Rhys Davies made Gimli sound Scottish. Or as they claim in the interview, quote, "It is literally just trying to take a particular dialect and hopefully do our Middle-earth spin on it," which explains this totally unnecessary unforced error. Quote, "There is another world, the Southlands, where we're doing a version of a Northern England accent, like Manchester. The way they live, in medieval huts in some cases, with mud and grime and chickens in the yard, is in no way meant to reference real people, certainly not the folks in Manchester. Why would you say this? Why would you walk yourself into this?" They could have said anything else, but these are the words they chose to defend themselves against accusations that they're insulting people. No, you're not saying the people of Manchester live in muddy, grimy huts with chickens. You just threw that in there for no reason. You don't just need writing classes, you need a PR rep. If there was any wonder why this show is a mess, there you go. Now, it's interesting that Tassi brought up HBO because Game of Thrones was a long, slow-building series. Entire seasons hinged around characters discovering one piece of information. Some storylines didn't get resolved for years, and some not at all. Yet the ratings increased year by year. The slow burn worked for the series because of the quality of the storytelling. People were invested in the characters, worried that their favorite might get killed off, waiting to see what jacked up thing would happen next, who would make an avoidable mistake, who would test the wrong person, and so on. It was damn good television, for a while. And the same is true of House of the Dragon, even though it's time-skipping like madness. The worst episode so far was the third, and it's still a good episode. But the fourth and fifth are just ridiculously good. I don't know what the title is of the fifth episode, but it should be, "You're gonna pay for being so happy." Literally every person who thinks they get to be happy gets fucked. It was awesome. Turns out that even though people are annoyed by the virtue-signaling race-swapping of the Valyrians, the writing, the acting, the story, and the look of the show is compelling. The characters are interesting, even though none of them are particularly likable. You want to know where this goes, who's going to side with who, and how much of a mess they're going to make by torching Westeros with their dragons. You're invested in the story because the writers took the time to write solid scripts that don't feel like watching Pharrell pretend to age. Someone in the comments on Tassie's article mentioned that Star Trek The Next Generation started off rough but improved after 3 seasons. The Rings of Power showrunners had 3 years to write these scripts. These scripts should be some of the most polished writing in Hollywood today, but they're not. They're mediocre, and the audience knows it. Now, if this were the only show out like this at the moment, maybe Amazon could stand a chance. But with House of the Dragon being out and being a superior show, people have another option, and they appear to be taking it. House of the Dragon has a higher viewership and audience rating. Given the consistent negative response, it's possible Amazon might try to course correct for the second season, which is currently in pre-production. However, I think they'll probably wait until after the second season to make any decision like that. They've invested too much money into the show to admit after 1 season that they screwed up. They'll hold out or secretly bring in people to fix the problems the showrunners caused so they can win over Tolkien fans and normies who don't like the show. Will that help? I don't know. For some people, all you have to do is slap Tolkien's name on something and they'll love it. Considering what's already been done, I don't see how anyone can undo it. They can only pretend it never happened, and I don't know how that would work. At this point, everyone can see the show's just not that good. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.